When we think about renowned residential Australian architecture, we think about Harry Seidler and the 1950s Rose Seidler house that he designed and built for his family. That was in Wahroonga. Today we're a few kilometres away in Turramurra, and I'm about to introduce you to another man who designed and built a house for his family and still resides here today, an amazing 40 years later. I'd like you to meet Mr. Daryl Lock. Hi Chris, lovely to see you. As a designer, where did the passion come from to design what you've created?
Chris, it's sort of the journey between what the landforms are doing and basic forms that will sit into that environment that inspire me. And it's a two-way thing in the sense that you approach a building from the outside, but then you also look out from the inside of it. So you're considering those two perspectives: one how it sits, and the other and how you look out from it, etc.
So Daryl, who are the people or the projects that have inspired you to do what you do?
Oh, Chris. Well, I guess the earliest one that impacted on me was Le Corbusier. What inspired me with him, he was both an artist and an architect, and his architecture really inspired me. So probably his little cathedral, or chapel is probably more correct, in France that he did was awesome, as I got to see it and attended a service there, and it was very, very inspiring.
Of all the projects you've designed over the years, which project is your favourite and why?
Well, I guess probably designing for yourself is also the hardest because you can move the goalposts, and as a result, it's a little bit like the emperor's clothes. The next outfit will probably be, you're figuring, will be better. Whereas if you're given a brief, then you work to that brief, but designing for yourself is the most challenging.
Where do you see design in the future?
I think we're in a very exciting part of the design area, particularly in architecture, because firstly the world is so diverse, but that is climate-wise and where people live, but then we're also becoming far more urbanised, which in turn creates a whole new area for the work in architecture. So that's very inspiring when you see how that is done.
Daryl, was design something that you were going to do at school, or was it a spontaneous decision to become a designer?
No, I was enthused from a very early age. My uncle was a boat builder, and he had this shed underneath this ginormous fig tree in Mackay in Queensland, and he would loft, what they call lofting the boat, doing the actual shaping of the drawing out the hull of the boat on the veranda of his house. And that activity of designing the shape of the boat, etc., was just really amazing, and I was inspired by how that all went together, and I was drawing, you know, from as early as I can remember. I was always drawing and building and making things and that sort of thing, yeah.
In your life, whether it's through the design or prior, what have been some of your biggest influences?
My first probably inspiration was a teacher in high school who taught me technical drawing, and he used to take us out to on camping trips, and one of my first failures was where I decided that if we rigged up two hammocks between two trees, one above the other, and had a cover over it, that it'd keep us both dry, but that proved to be wrong. So he was probably the first real influence in my thinking.
Where did you grow up?
When I was young, we were in New Guinea and in the Solomon Islands, and as a kid I built a couple of VJs as well. I built one and sold one, and so building and design and that kind of thing was always part of what I did. I was 14 when I came to Australia. I came down to high school, and we would fly home every Christmas. So that was a real event in my life. Australia's home, yeah. But the art of making canoes in New Guinea was something that I found fascinating. So I ended up cutting out a couple of dugout canoes in the process, and built canoes out of corrugated iron. That was a feat. Of course, they didn't. When they filled up with water, they sank, whereas the wooden one would float.
Daryl, what did you do when you finished school?
When I finished high school, I wanted to do art, so studied for a year, and that was the undoing. So from there on, it was art for numerous years, and I went on to study fine arts and illustrating, and went and took up a position in Melbourne for a publishing company there, and did artwork for them. So that's how it all started.
So I can see that you've got passion for art and architecture, but when I walked into your house, I noticed this Model T Ford in your garage. Can you elaborate a little bit further on the Model T Ford for us?
Well, I've got to thank my boat building uncle for that, because he had this Model T that lived under the fig tree, and he would get us kids together and put us in the back of it. He would crank the thing up and drive us down to the beach, and I thought that was just the most marvellous thing that my uncle could do. So he inspired me to have a Model T. So that was a interest that I managed to fulfill. I had an inspiration about building a glider. So it was virtually what you'd call a flying gate, as it was built on the format of a gate with wings, which is some of the very early gliders. And to launch this glider, we'd get on a steep hill, and we had a bungee run out the front on two sides with these bungee ropes made of rubber, and on the command, the guys would run down the hill, and this thing would take off and end up down the paddock a bit further down.
In one piece?
In one piece. Although it sustained an injury because there was wind blowing slightly sideways with, and as misfortune would have it, it hit this rock and the ground and demolished the skid, and so that had to be repaired. But so that's venturing into the flying side of things.
Looking at the house itself, there must be something. There must be a feature that's a favourite of yours of the house. What is your favourite part of the whole house?
Probably if I stand in the pit and look towards the stairs that come in from the walkway, just looking at the way those forms sit in the room, I think works very nicely. The other aspect is in the studio, where I stand on the corner of the room, and I feel as if I'm sort of levitating, and I can look over the bushland and the building from there, and that's quite inspiring.
So sitting in the lounge room, Daryl, you're looking around the building, enjoying the architecture 40 years later. Is there anything that you would do differently now to what you've done then?
No. The design has to stand on its own now, Chris, because it's home, and what's here is what is here, and probably the things that will happen now is just you change your painting periodically, or you make something that you think might work, and if it does, well, then it gets a place. Yeah. Yeah.
This building doesn't just sit on the land, it was designed to be part of the land. It's withstood bushfires and all that Mother Nature can throw at it, yet 40 years later it's still standing here testament to Daryl Lock's original design. I hope you enjoyed meeting Daryl as much as I did.